My plan is for us to conclude the little series that we began just a few weeks ago concerning God's will and God's Word. Most of us have been here. I think Kylie may be the only one visiting with us tonight. We're certainly happy to have her visiting from Starkville. The reasons that I wanted to talk about this are several. I told you earlier about a friend of mine whose wife passed away, had been engaged in an email, wondered if he should finish it for her. And we mentioned that nobody but God and you would have a better understanding of what her will was toward that person and what she would say. Then there are people who want to do something. They want to so badly that they go ahead and do it, and they feel good about it regardless of the scripturalness of it, and they say, I know it's God's will that this be done. And it could be an adulterous marriage. It could be doing some work that there's absolutely no Bible for, and yet we're just convinced it's God's will. And so we thought it would be good to look at this idea, and I want to conclude it tonight. And we've talked about the fact that God's will is known basically the way we know God, the way we know anybody. And we know persons by what they've done in the past, what they're doing at present, by what they've actually said. And from all of that, we can gain what their desire would be in matters that they had not specifically addressed. The same is true with God. We know God personally by His past, as revealed in His Word, by the works in both covenants, by what He has said. From that we can know what His will would be, even on matters that He has not specifically stated, given things that He has said about those things that are related. And we mentioned in that first chart that Jesus said we can know the Lord, and we know Him the same way we know a person. And the more we know a person by our familiarity with His past, His present, His words, all of that, we can know the same about God. And we pointed out that what constitutes God, the word will just simply means a desire, a purpose, a plan, a wish. And determining God's will on matters not specifically mentioned in His Word, this is something I added, no extra charge for tonight, but I added it tonight, that this does not come by a guess or a hunch. Does not come by a feeling, something we just think is going to be okay. It does not come by what I want to believe and do, regardless of other considerations. And the reason I know that is because if these things were true, God's will would be changeable, and it would be subjective, regardless of who it might be. If that's this person's will or thoughts that it would be God's will, then that's what it is. Truth becomes subjective. And we know that's not the case. The only way we can know anything about God's will is through His Word. We've not actually mentioned this passage, but I'd like for you to turn to it. This is an additional passage that we've not noticed in preceding lessons about this idea, but I was thinking about it earlier, and I wanted to include it in this last lesson, because I believe most of us here tonight are teachers of others. We don't have too many people who are not Christians and been Christians for a while. And I think when we're talking with others about the Bible and about how you can know God, there are people who say, well, when I go out in the woods, I feel close to God. Or I just think more about God when I'm in nature or out by the seacoast on the Gulf or something. And they have these vague, nebulous ideas about God and they can be completely opposed to what is actually revealed in His Word. And in 1 Corinthians 2, when Paul contrasted the wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God, he pointed out that nobody could really know what was in the mind of God except God reveal Himself, and that by words. If you pick up the reading in verse 9, as it is written, things which I saw not and ear heard not, and which entered not into the heart of man, whatsoever things God prepared for them that love Him, that this involves His wisdom, God's divine wisdom. But unto us, that would be the apostles, God revealed them, that is, things which eye could not see, ear could not hear, things which would not enter into the heart. That is the whole scheme of redemption. He said, but unto us God revealed these things, or them, through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God. Then notice the illustration he uses. For who among men knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of the man which is in him? You can't know what I'm thinking right now unless I tell you. I can't know what you're thinking right now unless you would tell me. And he says the same is true with God. Even so the things of God none knoweth, save the Spirit of God. But we receive not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is from God, that we might know the things that were freely given to us of God, which things also we speak, not in words which man's wisdom teacheth, but that which the Spirit teacheth, combining spiritual things with spiritual words. So the words of the Spirit communicate the ideas of God, the Spirit. And so it's through the words revealed to the apostles that we know what the mind of God is. Hence, we know the will of God only through the words that he has revealed by the Spirit. That's the only way we can know anything about God. We can look at nature and see its majesty and know that there has to be a supreme being behind it, but we can't know the nature of that supreme being or how powerful it is. We might think, as the Indians did in the long ago, that there's a sun god or a moon god or rain god, and think that there's a plurality of gods rather than one God who does all. You cannot know the nature of God or the things about God save he reveal it in his word. And it's possible to be well-pleasing to God. Hence, it is possible to know his will. If we can be well-pleasing, and the Bible asserts that we can, in Hebrews 11:6, by faith, without faith it is impossible to be well-pleasing unto God. For he that comes to him must believe that he is, that it is a rewarder of them that diligently seek it. We can be well-pleasing. We make it our aim, whether in the body or absent, to be well-pleasing unto him, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 9. We know, couldn't help but think, I used earlier in one of these lessons the passage in 1 Corinthians 7 about the husband-wife relation, where in 32, 3 and 4, the woman who is married cares for the things of the world, how she may please her husband, and is divided. The man who is married cares for the things of the world, how he may please his wife. Sometimes an anniversary comes or a birthday comes up and you say, well, what can I get my wife? What can I get my husband? Well, I know he likes this and that, and I'm not sure about that. Would be really nice. I mean, I like that. I think she should like that. But you're not sure. But you're sure about the other. Then why not remove all doubt and get what you're sure about than taking a chance on something you're not sure about? Just do what is, well, she will be really happy if I get this because I know she's talked about that. And the same is true with God, that I know God will be happy with me when I go this route. And so we looked also at the fact that there are different areas of God's will, His commanded will, what He says we should do. We might do it, we might not, but this is His commanded or prescribed will. Things that will occur whether we want to or not, His decreed will. What He wants to happen. He wants us to be saved. God is not willing that any should perish. God would have all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And then His providential will. And Scripture teaches that if we desire to know His will, we can know it. We can know it. We can understand what it is. Be not foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Ephesians 5, verse 17. However, when we face numerous situations where God's Word has not specifically given an answer, what are we to do? Well, we go back. Remember how we come to know God. And then how do we do that? Saturate our minds with His Word. Pray for wisdom in handling it accurately. Desire to be well-pleasing to God. I don't have the idea, can I get away with this? Or can I slide into heaven, so to speak, like in the home plate? Can I slide in by the skin of my teeth if I go ahead and do what I want to do anyway and not sure it's what really God wants me to do? Seek counsel of spiritually mature, godly people. And the last thing that I want to mention that I haven't mentioned in lessons gone by, past is whatever we do, never violate our conscience. I should have mentioned this in the preceding lessons, but that's something I want to add in this one. Whatever we do, when it's a matter that God has not specifically said something about, but we have all of the other passages that deal with related matters, and then we think, I've got a question about this practice. I've got a question whether I should or not. Then don't just go on headlong, but pull back on the reins, slow down, think, and never violate our conscience. That's the point in Romans 14. Paul had two things under primary discussion. The keeping of certain days, and you could imagine here are Jews and Gentiles in the Roman church. Jews were used to the idea of dietary regulations. They couldn't eat pork. They could not eat catfish. There are a number of things they couldn't eat. Gentiles might be, Greeks might be used to certain animals being offered for sacrifices. Then they all become Christians. And the Jew thinks, I can't get past this particular day without honoring God in this way, esteeming various days. And a Jew said, well, I have never eaten a piece of barbecue in my life, barbecue pork in my life. I just cannot. I know they've said it's okay, but I just can't. And so Paul deals with that and how we deal with each other. And we should not despise. And these are matters that are fine with God, but conscientiously questionable on the part of the individual. So he says in verse 1, him that is weak in faith, that is, he's weak, and not that he doesn't attend services regularly. He's weak in the sense that he's not sure a particular activity is right, that God has allowed, a liberty. One has faith to eat all things, he that is weak eats only herbs, and so on. But the principle is, verse 5, one man esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each man be fully assured in his own mind. If we were only going to mark two passages in Romans 14 as significant principles, that's one. Let each man do that which is fully persuaded. He's fully assured in his own mind. He goes on to talk about this matter and illustrates it. And then in verse 23, but he that doubteth is condemned if he eat, because he eats not of faith. That is, his own personal faith that the practice I'm doing is absolutely right. There's no question about it. He's condemned if he eats because he eats not of faith, and whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So here are matters that are, we might say, divine liberties. God says you can eat this meat over here. But here's a person who's not been used to that, or maybe he thinks it could have been used in some idolatry. I just want to stay away from it. And that's fine. He should not partake of something that there's a question about. And here's a particular day. And there are all kinds of modern day examples that we can follow along those. But how are we to find God's will? We should never, when we're looking for God's will and in a particular question, violate our conscience on anything. And that helps us out. We've looked at, I'm just going to repeat, not all the points, but we looked at marriage, and we asked questions about dating people seriously, the rearing of children. So we looked at passages on the subject of marriage. We looked at baptism. What did we know? What did we confess? Who might have baptized us? That is, was it a denominational preacher? What did we confess? What were we taught when we were baptized? So we looked at all the passages that, or at least a good sampling of them, that deal with the subject of baptism. We talked about attending other churches, faithful churches, but floating, not being dependable in any one congregation. Then we talked about attending denominational churches, and what about that? So we talked about local church assemblies, what the Bible says about that, obligations, growth the necessity of growth, the necessity of being accountable one to another, local church membership, responsibilities leaders have, elders have over that. And then last week we talked about what can I do to my body insofar as the apparel is concerned? How should I clothe it? Are there any limitations? And what about body art, tattoos and piercings? So we looked at the proper use, what the Bible says about the body, the proper use of it, clothing and care of our bodies, and then what is most important, which is really what body art is all about. It's the expression of what I think is important. So we looked at those ideas. I want to talk about one more idea tonight, and that involves work. What is God's will relative to my work? And as a subpoint, of what kind of work does God approve? Any, all kinds, as long as I do what I'm told. And so I thought it would be good for us just to think about some ideas along these lines. I'd like to go first of all, when looking at it, if you just kind of go in a linear fashion, that's always a pretty good idea. Is there anything said about whatever thing you're considering and the creation of the world? And there is. In Genesis 2, when God created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, he said in verse 15, or Moses wrote in verse 15, that God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Involved in those ideas is work. God did not design Adam and Eve just to sit back in the lap of luxury and have nothing to do, but there was the design for them to be busy, to tend, to keep the garden. After sin came into the world, as chapter 3 shows, then work became more difficult. If you look at verse 17, unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In toil shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. So what was keeping and tending the garden becomes more difficult. And I think it doesn't take an Einstein to see that our works can become extremely difficult, toilsome, as long as we go. But the point we're making is mental, emotional, physical effort was what God had in mind from the very beginning. And I want to say this, sometimes people get the idea that it's better to have it all easy, as if, an easy job is always the best job. I've never thought that. And that doesn't mean that we ought to do something that's impossible, but that requires a considerable diligence to put into it. That's what the Lord requires. That's what's really good for us. Something that there's a sense of accomplishment. The Bible doesn't talk about this, but there's a sense of accomplishment, self-worth. When the bar is high and you commit yourself and you do due diligence and you put your whole heart and soul into it and you get a job accomplished, there is the sense of accomplishment. That here's something to be done, I can do it, and I did it. I'm glad. Not that I'm, all so good on my part, but there's a sense that there's a job that needs to be done. I feel like I can do it, and I got it done, and I'm glad I did. And I believe God put that in us to know that here is something that needs to be accomplished. It's going to satisfy some needs, and when I do it, I can feel I've done my part. God made us that way. And there are several, this is just a sampling, but there are several proverbs that commend or extol the idea of diligent work, hard work, industrious work. Just notice a few of these proverbs with me. In Proverbs, the 10th chapter, in verse 5, he that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causes shame. He gathers in summer. That is, you work while you have opportunity. You work at things that need to be done at the present time. But he says, but he that sleeps in harvest, he's not concerned about doing things when they need to be done, then he causes shame. In the 14th chapter of Proverbs, verse 23, in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury or poverty. In all labor, hard work, usually speaking, when a person is diligent, he uses the talents, abilities that he has, there's going to be profit involved in that. In chapter 18, verse 9, he also that is slack in his work is brother to him that is a destroyer. Some translations say that what will be destroyed in the hereafter. When he's slack, he's slow, he's slothful in his work, then it pays off in a bad way. In chapter 28 of Proverbs, verse 19, 28 verse 19, he that tilleth his land shall have plenty of bread, but he that followeth after vain persons, or frivolity, some translations say, shall have poverty enough. You stay busy and don't be sidetracked by things that are meaningless. I see that happens quite a bit, don't you? That here's work to be done, here's an opportunity for a young person, or older for that matter. Here's an opportunity, here's something you could do, and it may not be the very thing you want to do right now, but if you do it and you do a hard work and you're industrious, you'll be noticed and you can be promoted, you know. Versus just, well, that's not what I want to do, so I won't do anything. That's the idea of a lot of people, but it's not in Proverbs. In chapter 31, speaking of the worthy woman who can find her prices far above rubies, there are several things stated about her hard work, which reminds me of the saying, you know, a man works from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. I've heard that all my life. In verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. In verse 17, she girds her loins with strength, and makes strong her arms. And then the last verse, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Let her works praise her in the gates. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, when some lady, some sister and the Lord has passed, and her legacy involves things that she's given or helped others to do, especially young ladies to do. And here are evidence, kind of like Dorcas, and the garments that she had made, that you're reminded of those, and that there's evidence of her work and her help and her teaching and training all around. And that's extolled. We're not to steal. Look at Ephesians 4. We sometimes quote that and just kind of run right through it and get the main point. But I want you to notice something here. In verse 28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor or labor working with his hands the thing that is good, that he may have whereof to give to him that hath need. Let him that stole don't steal anymore. Now let's apply this to work. This would rule out, this verse, I'm using this a little differently than with sometimes, or that I sometimes use it, but I think in a right way. Let him that stole steal no more. This would rule out gambling from a lot of different points of view. It was stated years ago that gambling is to stealing what dueling is to murder. Gambling is to stealing by mutual consent. Dueling is to murder by mutual consent. Doesn't make it right, but you're wanting to take what rightfully belongs to somebody else for yours through deceit, through bluff. It violates the golden rule, a number of other things. But not to steal would rule out gambling. It would rule out working in any kind of a gambling hall, bingo or whatever. Say you got a chance to make $150 an hour working at some bingo joint or gambling joint. What about a casino? You go over to Mississippi, Tunica, somewhere, and you're able to rake in, if you'll just work the slot machines, or you just be a guard at there. Yeah, I couldn't do that because the very item that is being, or the very service that is being provided would be a violation of God's will. What kind of work? What about being a government spy, where you are actually stealing information from another government? Somebody says, yeah, but what if that government's bad? You're stealing. You're still stealing information that you don't have. What about being a government spy and lying about that? Same thing. Committing fornication in order to obtain some information. Not to steal. Let him that stole steal no more, but let him work with his hands what is right or good, that he might have whereof to give to him that has need. Here's another idea. I think and I was taught this way back by several brethren. I remember being in junior high and high school classes, I had several male teachers really impress this on me because I remembered it. And it would go something like this. They'd say, guys, when you're older, what you need to do is get you the kind of job that not only just provides just enough for you to get by, but having your mind set, the idea, I want to support my family and I want to have enough left over to give liberally to the church and give to others who have need. See, that raises the bar, doesn't it? But that's exactly what Christians ought to be about. And so when I'm looking for a job, it's not just anything that comes by, but I'm trying, especially when we're younger, I'm trying to focus in on that which will really help, where my whatever abilities, intellect I might have, resources at my disposal, that I can use all of them for good. So not to steal would rule out several things. Colossians 3:22, 3 and 4 is another passage that deals with the idea of work. It actually comes under the slave-master relation. And I know there are brethren who say, well, the slave-master relation does not apply to employer relations. Well, there are principles certainly that imply. You're not a slave to a particular corporation, I understand that. But when you voluntarily submit or sign a contract or whatever that you're going to work for these people, you'll do what you're told and so on, then you need to keep your word about that. So in verse 22, servants, obey in all things them that are your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, that is just when they're looking, but in singleness of heart, fearing the Lord. Single-hearted purpose, focused, we might say. Don't get distracted on the job. Do what you're told. Fearing the Lord, knowing that the Lord is behind, the Lord is watching all we do. Whatsoever ye do, work heartily as unto the Lord, and not unto men. You work as if the Lord were your supervisor, your employer, knowing that from the Lord ye shall receive the recompense of the inheritance. Ye serve the Lord Christ. So, what do we learn there? Several things. We are to work when being looked on, when not being looked on. We're to work heartily, from the heart, giving it our all. We're talking about industriousness. Just going at being an eager, we used to call them eager beavers. They're after it. Let's get after it. When we're playing ball, any team sport, you always have those who lead, they're doing the best, they're sprinting, whatever the exercise is. And then you have those who are called loafers. They're just trying to get through practice and get out of there. And the same way is true with work. You get there on time, you show up when you're supposed to be, you're not late, you do what you're told, you're looking for things to do. I know when my wife was working at the eye care, she'd talk about people who, there are plenty of things to do, and here's somebody on the phone, texting or doing something on the phone and then the superiors have to get on to them. We ought to be looking. I'm on their dime. They're paying me for the time I'm here. Therefore, I need to be industriously using my time. Well, that also rules out work stoppage. If you work heartily as unto the Lord, you're not slowing down and doing the or the minimum. You're doing all you can do. Slowdowns, vandalism to employers' equipment. All these things would be ruled out by these verses. I don't have that in here, but the golden rule applies. Whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them. This is the law and the prophets. Put yourself in the position, if I were the employer, rather than being the employee. And I'm working with this equipment, how would I want my employees to work? How would I want them to deal with this equipment? Would I want them to make sure the maintenance is kept up, lubricated properly, whatnot? Do I make sure that proper people are called when they should be? All of that's a part of it, of being industrious. And it rules out these things that we see commonly in our day and age. The Bible also teaches that whatever we do should be honorable work, or whatever product is made or service is provided should be right and helpful. And I think there's several passages that deal with this. Romans 12 verse 17, we are to take thought for things honorable in the sight of all men. In 2 Thessalonians 3:10, it doesn't really deal with what's honorable, but if a man does not work, neither should he eat. And it's incumbent on people who are in families to provide for their own. He who provides not for his own, especially those of his own house, is worse than an infidel. He's denied the faith. It is worse than an infidel. 1 Timothy 5 verse 8. Well, that would certainly rule out prostitution. Any kind of honorable work that's providing a service or a product that is good or helpful. It rules out prostitution. That's immoral to start with. Or any work that would cause one to sin with the use of his or her body. What if you were able to, well, let's just say it this way. Before, I like to read some of the sports articles, and several weeks ago, it might have been 2 or 3 months ago, I saw where the Birmingham Stallions, it just opened up shop, yesterday. The Birmingham Stallions was going to have some tryouts for cheerleaders. And tongue-in-cheek, I told my wife, I said, well, the time is over there. You got to go over there, try out as a cheerleader. But here you are, national TV, in front of thousands of people, in very skimpy outfits. And so the actual use of your body and something that people can leer at and lust after, I would think it would rule that kind of work out. What if you're paid a lot of money for it? You're doing your work, you're doing what you're told, but what kind of a product are you? What kind of a service are you providing? What kind of a product are you making? It deals with that. And making or selling of any product that would be sinful. Whether it be alcohol, I've told people, when you think about Acts 19 and how Demetrius, you remember the silversmith, when Paul's preaching and teaching for 3 years there in Ephesus, had made inroads into the very culture itself. And Demetrius said, our guild here of silversmithing and making of idols, the great Diana of the Ephesians, is we're about to go out of business, and she's not what she's purported to be. If this keeps up, their business was going downhill. Well, that's what should happen. Just like if there was a mass obedience to the gospel in Milwaukee with all the breweries around there. Of course, you don't have to go to Milwaukee anymore. We got them down in Alabaster and over in Crestwood, and you got them, all these little breweries all the way, these little single mom and pop shops now. But what about a brewery? Well, you wouldn't want to be in the process of making something that's causing a person to sin. You wouldn't do that. Well, I'm just doing what I'm told. But what you're doing is the product that you're producing is sinful to people. I had an extended family member one time who was working in a movie hall, movie theater. And all kinds of movies shown. And his mother said, well, he's not watching them, he's just selling tickets. You're part of that. Nobody else would know what you weren't watching. What about modeling? You're using just using the good looks, or just maybe you're modeling some clothes and all of a sudden somebody says, well, I'd like to remove those clothes. I've done some reading. The models make pretty good money from what I've understood. But what are you sacrificing for all of that? Work that does not take precedence over my ability to maintain family obligations, or faithfulness in local church assemblies or local church activities. I think that would have to go into the whole scheme of thinking as well. Landon used that this morning. Seek ye first God's kingdom and his righteousness. All these things shall be added unto you. That has to be figured in with, am I making my work my God? Am I making the activities with my job, is it taking precedence over every other consideration? I knew a fella who was an electrician, not Brother Gene, but it's somebody I knew up in North Alabama. And he had an opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia and spend about 2 years there. And at the time, it was in the 80s, at the time, he would have been making over $200,000 a year. You think, well, that's a no-brainer. He needed to go. Yeah, but he had a wife and kids back home, and he's gone for 2 years. Besides the fact that where he was going, there was no faithful congregation. He was just going for work. I think that has to enter the picture. What's the situation? What is it going to do with my wife? Can I leave her that long, or him that long? Or what's the situation with the children? Will they, what am I giving up when my obligations here in order to satisfy the demands of a job? And what am I giving up with the job and sacrificing, or I'm sorry, turn that around. What am I sacrificing or giving up in respect to the influence of Christians and trying to help and encourage Christians, maybe teach or be taught, all that's involved in local church activities for over here in order to, those are factors, I am convinced, that need to go into the question relative to work, or what kind of work does God approve. So when we boil it all together, or boil it all down, my work, if it should be honorable, we make an honorable product, selling an honorable product, or an honorable service. And not only that, but my business in that work is I'm industrious. I'm doing the very best I can. I'm working heartily as unto the Lord, not as unto men. So it's honorable work. I'm working an honest day's wage, or honest day's work for an honest day's pay. All of those things go together in answer, I think, to this. So, of what kind of work does God approve? Well, it depends on what kind of work it is. All kinds, as long as I do what I'm told. No, there are some parameters on it. And I hope this has been helpful to think about all of this. Well, we mentioned all that. That was all I was going to talk about tonight. But I want to end with this idea that really, with thinking about these ideas, it helps us to see that God demands that we really reason from His Word and draw conclusions. Not on the charts, any of the charts. But Jesus did that. I'm reminded in Matthew 15, the Pharisees were after Jesus, you remember? And they said, your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders because they don't wash their hands, that is in a ceremonial way, before they eat bread. And Jesus turned the tables and said, you transgress the commandment of God because of your traditions. Because the law said, thou shalt honor thy father and mother. And you say, that which was given to me, or that which I have was given to God, that is Corban, and you are able to abdicate your responsibilities to your parents. Now, what I'm saying by that, Jesus pronounced them guilty of that. And Jesus said, basically, the command, honor thy father and mother, has all kinds of applications. Somebody could say, well, he didn't say I had to, didn't say I had to pay or keep up my... No, that was implied in honor thy father and mother, that you take care of them. That's a deduction, a reasoning from the Scriptures. We have some brethren who do not believe in necessary inferences. They do not believe that necessary inferences or deductions are a means of establishing Bible authority for what we do, as well as direct commands and apostolic examples. And I believe the Bible teaches this, as we've tried to make known through a number of, I think, practical applications of work, marriage, other things, as well as the work of the church. It's all related. It's all related. So we can take the Bible, try our best to determine everything God says about whatever subject we have under consideration. Deduce from that these ideas that relate to the question at hand, and I believe if we have the right attitude, we will to do His will, John 7:17, we can know what God's will is on these matters. You've been listening very carefully, and I appreciate it and hope our thoughts have been helpful. If something is amiss in life that needs to be corrected, we're going to stand and sing the song that Brother David has selected for your encouragement. Let us help you if we can.